Okay, I think we have basically everybody in now. Thank you for joining us this morning for this webinar. It's roughly about 22 minutes and then we'll go straight into a Q&A. Feel free to ask questions throughout. There's a questions panel there. So at any point of the webinar, if you wish to ask a question, put it in and we'll get to it at the end. So without ado, we'll get this started.
Hi, today we'll be doing an overview of capabilities of WebMI in Cscape. So let's take a look at our agenda for today's tutorial. To start, we're going to go through an introduction of WebMI. We're going to talk about how it works. We're going to go through creating web pages, which you don't need HTML programming knowledge for. We'll talk about publishing the web pages you create. We'll give you some helpful hints to make your experience with WebMI as smooth as possible, and we'll finish with a live questions and answer session. So what is WebMI? It's the capability for Horner all-in-one controllers to serve up web pages over Ethernet from their local memory slot. These web pages are typically used for remote monitoring and/or control. Web pages created through WebMI are done so through Cscape, and you don't need any additional programming knowledge. And the web pages that are created using HTML5, meaning they're compatible with nearly all web browsers. So which products support WebMI? Most of our modern products that feature a built-in Ethernet port support WebMI. The Micro series except the X2, our entire XL series, and the entire RC series except the RCC 6512. So how does WebMI work? WebMI web pages are developed in Cscape. They're loaded to a folder on the micro SD card that has to be installed in the OCS prior. And if that OCS is connected to a local network through a wired or wireless connection, it can then connect with other devices through their own web browsers. It is important to add that wireless connections bring the possibility of mobile WebMI connections. If you want to access OCS units outside of your factory using WebMI, you need to bypass the firewalls in place. For most medium to large companies, that usually means hiring a third-party company to provide a path through, so using one of these providers listed on screen. Smaller companies will often allow their key vendors to get in through firewalls or poke holes in their firewall to the point where they can access their WebMI features remotely. During demonstrations today, there are going to be two parts, me describing the process of the demonstrations and then showing the pre-recorded video of the presentations themselves. Next, we're going to talk about creating and publishing web pages in Cscape. So, the web pages are created in Cscape, and there are two approaches. First, you can replicate screens that have already been developed in the OCS, so it has the same content and is in the same resolution, and you have the option to have it work synchronously or asynchronously. The second approach you can take is to create completely new web pages using the Cscape Web Designer configuration. This allows you to select higher resolutions if necessary, but it's always an asynchronous approach. With either approach, there's no need to learn any new languages. So first, let's look at creating a web page by replicating an existing OCS screen in your project. This process is only available on the X5 and XL series from the XL4 up. The general process is we're going to open the application, open the graphics editor, set up user access credentials, adjust WebMI parameters, and then publish the web pages. There are two ways of transferring the web pages once they're created. Directly over FTP or to your computer, where they can be manually copied to your SD card. The last step is launching a browser and testing it. Let's take a look at how the process of creating existing pages works. So I'm looking at my existing developed Cscape project. Let's enter the graphics editor by selecting this icon at the top of our screen. As you can see, we have a simple one-screen application, but there's a few things we must do before we can turn them into web pages. So first, let's go to Config at the top left of our screen. Look down and select Security Configuration. This is a list of the login credentials users can use to gain access to WebMI from their web browser. In this case, you can see that I've added a user, a password, and an access level. An access level is assigned to every object that has an action in it. For example, a button ranges from 0 to 7. The higher the access level, the higher the security level required to edit the button. In this case, the user has an access level of 3, so any object with an access level of 3 or lower will be accessible to the user. So next, I'm going to go to Screens, which can be found in the top left of your screen. We look down and we can select Web Options. My first parameter is listed whenever a user logs into a device. A title is going to appear on their web page. So first, I'm going to edit this name to my company name, so Ace Manufacturing. The second parameter is the connection time out interval. This is how long it will take for your browser not connecting to the internet for it to time out. Next is Enable Screen Sync. Screen Sync is an option you can check if you're just replicating your existing screens. What Screen Sync does is whenever a screen changes locally by the operator, if you're monitoring via WebMI at the time, that screen is also going to change remotely via WebMI, and vice versa. In this case, I'm not going to check that. Next is Inhibit Session Timeout. That's an option where we can decide to stop session timeouts from occurring, even if there's a lack of user activity, which I'm going to leave unchecked for now. Next, let's take a look at our advanced settings. Here we have a keep alive interval, as well as a publish interval. In general, it is recommended to leave these at their default, as there is almost never any reason to change them. We also have authentication type, which we have set at digest authentication. This is the level of authentication that is used with WebMI. Keep in mind that if you're using a device from a company like Sycamia or E1, they will be providing all the security, so in that scenario you may want to change it to basic authentication. Most of the time you can leave the advanced options alone. Okay, so lastly let's go to the WebMI tab up in the center top of our screen. From here you can publish the website, launch the website, and display and validate your WebMI license and publish to removable media. The first thing I'm going to do is display and validate my WebMI license. This shows me my MAC address and how many pages, users, and data points I've been authorized for. If we weren't properly licensed, this area will be filled in red. I'm now ready to publish, so what this means is Cscape will take the screens I've already created and it's going to turn those into WebMI pages. There's a few ways I can do that. So first we can go to WebMI up at the top of our screens, and we can select Publish Website. This will publish the web pages and then attempt to communicate locally with my OCS over FTP to transfer those web pages. The other way we can do it is by publishing to removable media. That way I can copy the web files over to a memory card, and that process happens quickly, so you don't have to depend on a file transfer over FTP. And I can just transfer those licenses over the memory card. After selecting to publish over removable media, it asks me to browse my folders for WebMI. In this case, I'm not going to write it directly to my memory card, but I'm going to write it to my desktop. During this process, Cscape is exporting and publishing. So let's say OK and close down Cscape, and take a look at my files on removable media. So now I need to copy that entire folder as is to my removable media memory card. So I can right click and select to removable disk E. To check this, I'm going to enter my file manager and take a look at it. So just looking at removable disk E, there's a data logging folder from past use, and the WebMI folder I just put in. There's also a firmware.license file that I received earlier. Okay, so now let's put this removable memory back into the OCS. To test out WebMI, I'm going to open up Chrome and input the IP address into the URL. Now we have a user login, and I'm going to enter the details we created in the graphics section. The first time you log into WebMI, you have to agree to a license agreement, but once this is done, you won't have to do it again. So here is a real-world view of my application. So if I were to operate the OCS, I would see a clear reaction through WebMI. As you can see, there is a visible response on the screen, and this is accurately portraying my work on the OCS. So there we go. With a small few steps, we've taken an existing project with existing screens and published those as web pages using WebMI. Next, we're going to talk about creating new web pages using what's called a Seascape Web Designer project. All units can support this approach to WebMI page creation. The process is almost identical on the back end. The difference comes in the front end. So what does this process look like? We start out by opening a new application using File New. We then go to Web Designer. Select Web Designer as our target. We select the resolution we want to use for our web pages. Go back to our existing application. Copy all of our IO names and paste them into the current Web Designer file. Go to the new project and go to the graphics editor and start developing screens as if it were a high resolution OCS. Once we've created our screens, we do everything else the exact same way. Set up the user credentials, adjust the WebMI parameters, and publish. So let's go ahead and do that in practice. Alright, so we're back in the existing application again. This time we're going to create brand new web pages from scratch. First thing we're going to do is go to the top left of our screen, click File, New Project, and select OK. The next step is to enter the hardware configuration through this icon in the top right of the screen. It's currently configured for my target because that's what I'm connected to. But in this case, under Series, I want to switch to Web Designer. OK, and now I have my choice of 3 different resolutions. 1024 by 768, 1200 by 800, and 1920 by 1080. I'm going to go ahead and select the middle one. So I've created my project. For Web Designer with a screen that's 1200 by 800. Before I start designing my pages, it would be helpful if I had all the same IO names from my original application in my new application. So I'm going to go back to my original application, which was called Purge Fill. I'm going to go to the IO Names section program, IO Names. I'm going to copy all of these, go back to my new Web Designer project, go into the IO Names sections for this project, and hit Paste. Am I sure I want to do that? And I'll say yes. OK, so now all my IO names that were present in my original application that's running on the controller are available for me to choose from when I go and create new web pages. So now I'm going to go to the graphics editor, and you can see that I've got a 1200 by 800 window in which to design screens. To show you it in action, we're going to put time data on the screen. The real-time clock can be accessed in the OCS from sister register number 44. Starting in system register 44, we're going to go with hours, minutes, seconds per time. We're going to set a large font and center it. We don't need a legend, so we're going to remove it. OK, and OK. Now, let's go ahead and pick out some data from the actual application. So we're going to create a new gauge object from this icon. This is where I can pick one of my existing variables. In this case, let's go ahead and select inlet pressure, inlet PSI, which is on my list. We know that's a scale from 0 to 400, so we've created a simple gauge. And we'll also create a bar graph as well. So let's make this one for tank pressure. Next, I'm going to fast forward through the standard screen creation. So again, we pick tank pressure from the list. We're going to change the color to green. We're going to set the legend to tank_PSI. We'll change the background to blue, and we're going to set this object's background blue. And as the writing can be a little hard to see, we're going to set its text to white. Alright, so let's create another screen to show you how easy this is. And let's actually move the time over to another screen. So I'm going to use a jump box because I want to show you how to change screens relatively easily. So let's say we're going to go to screen number 2 with this screen jump, and let's label it time. And when we go to screen number 2, let's give it a different background. I'm going to go ahead and paste that time object that I had on the other page. And we need a better way of getting back to the home page. So let's add another jump button here. In this one, we want to go to screen 1, which is correct. We're going to remove the legend, and we're going to set the attribute to the home icon. So it's nothing special, but it's a quick and easy web page. We're going to show a data object while we're here. So we're grabbing a numeric data object from the top left of our screens. We're going to show tank pressure as numeric data. So we'd select tank pressure from the list. Let's make engineering units as PSI. We'll make our font a pretty good size, and let's change the legend to tank PSI. We're going to set it as non-editable. Lastly, we're going to enlarge the legend text. Okay, so now we're going to go ahead and finish the process, just like we did when we had our original screens. So if you remember, the first thing we need to do is set up our user access credentials here in our security configuration. We need to add a user, so I'm just going to type this in as Chuck, and the same credentials as I used before. Again, I'll give myself an access level of 3. I could give it from anything from 0 to 7. A 5-minute timeout is fine here. I'm going to go back here under Screens for Web Options and change my marquee to Ace Manufacturing and leave everything else alone. And now I'm going to go to WebMI at the top left of my screen, and I'm going to publish removable media. Next, I'm going to publish to my desktop. The web files have been exported successfully to removable media. Fantastic. So they should be sitting here on my desktop. Alright, let's close the graphics window and minimize Seascape. There's our WebMI files. So let's go and right click on them and send them to the E drive. In my case, the E drive is where my micro SD card got mapped into my computer. Okay, so now let's verify that the WebMI folder got copied to the micro SD card. Perfect. There's the WebMI folder just as we expected it. I moved my memory card over, so it's now back in the OCS. But next, let's navigate to the OCS's IP address. Here's our login, and we're going to sign in. It just started up, as you can hear the beep on the OCS. Now, we'll hit the purge button and watch it go down. If I want to switch screens, I can press the button here, which takes me to this next page. Alright, so that's the process for creating new web pages. There's 2 methods for transferring our web page files that we publish to the OCS. There's over FTP using the publish website option, and directly to your computer to a location that you specify with the publish to removable media option. With FTP, the WebMI folder is copied over FTP. FTP transfers are convenient but can be time consuming. Direct transfers are a 2-step process, initiated using the publish to removable media option. The WebMI folder is copied over to a local computer and is then manually copied to the microSD card by the user. There is an extra step, but overall it is much faster and more reliable. Next, let's talk about some helpful hints. WebMI has been available for a while, and we've continued to make improvements both on the Seascape side and the firmware side. And so, some of the new firmware would be recommended for making the process work better, as well as including some new features like timeout control, for example. Another point I should make, if your time and date on the OCS are very inaccurate, sometimes that can trip up the licensing, even though the license isn't necessarily time-based. At runtime, after you've licensed your OCS, you can go to the System menu and take a look under license details and tell if your licensing is active. You can also display/validate license in the graphics editor while you're connected online to an OCS to see how many data points and how many pages you've used. At runtime, after you've licensed your OCS, you can go to the System menu and take a look under license details and tell if your licensing is still active. Don't let that expiry date confuse you. That's 100 years in the future. And if there happens to be a user logged in at the time, it'll show that as well. Next, we're going to go through some hints on the LAN configuration side. WebMI is available on LAN 1 and on the USB to Wi-Fi adapter wireless LAN. Make sure your LANs are on different subnets. We still have a legacy choice in the LAN configuration for HTTP/web server. It's not WebMI, it's a legacy web server we supported for years. So don't select the HTTP resident protocol. It will cause errors. And lastly, if you're not sure, you can communicate to the unit from your web browser. A good thing to do is to ping a unit just to make sure that you can actually communicate with it between your computer and the OCS itself over the Ethernet connection. If you decide to use FTP to transfer between Cscape and the unit, you use the Publish Web Pages option in the graphics editor. And before you use that option, make sure FTP is working. It requires that FTP to be set up in Cscape for that OCS and that configuration be downloaded into the OCS to make sure FTP is enabled and that you've got at least one read-write user credential. You're going to want to make sure that once you press the Publish Website button, you get the FTP pop-up that's shown here. And lastly, you're going to want to type in the target IP. That's the OCS IP address. You don't want to change the target folder. And the username and password it's asking for, these are actually the FTP username and password, not any of the login credentials from the web browser for logging into WebMI. As a test for FTP, before you start using a web API or using Cscape to publish your web pages over FTP, it's often a good idea to use a web browser or an FTP client just to verify that everything's working properly. Thank you for listening so far. Next, we'll be moving on to a live questions and answer session.
Okay, that was that. We have a few questions in, so we'll just get through those there now. I have a controller with 2 Ethernet ports. Which one do I need to use? I believe this came in just before the slide on that. We recommend you use LAN 1 when you're licensing the unit. Is there a limit on the number of simultaneous users on a single OCS? A maximum of 4 at one time. I'm using an X4, but the WebMI option is grayed out. Yes, so on the XLEE, the XLTE, the X4 and the X7, you will need to use the Web Designer option, which you would have seen earlier in the webinar. So for those units, you've got to use Web Designer for creating WebMI pages. What else have we got here? Can we get a license if we know the MAC ID without connecting to Cscape? Yes, if you know the MAC ID, you can go to the licensing portal and enter it there. What else have we got here? Is the license for a controller or for one company or for as many controllers? It is for one controller, so it's a license per controller. What else have we got here? Copy IO names is available with SP4. Yes, as far as I'm aware, yes. I will follow up and verify that, but yes, as far as I'm aware, yes, copy IO names is available with SP4. Can we have WebMI open on a computer 24/7? Yes. Yes, you can have it 24/7. You may have you may need to manage timeouts, but yeah, you can have it open 24/7. Without logging off, oh, that's a follow-on from that question. Yes, you can use the inhibit session timeout. Have we anything else coming in there? What happens if you lose the micro SD card? You can re-download the license onto a new SD card and it'll be fine again. There'll be no issues there. Just looking here now, have I covered everything? Trends, are trends working? So standard trends are not supported, but retentive trends are. Although it is limited, so if you are using RCCs, it is not supported. But other than that, retentive trends is supported, but standard trends is not supported. Okay, that looks to be everything. Thank you very much for joining us this morning. We hope to see you again at our future webinars. We do have one coming up this Thursday. Yeah, thank you. Hope to see you again. Have a good day.